Welcome. I'm Allyson Brooks with the League of Women Voters. Welcome to our County Assessor Forum. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, and we aim to make sure that we have informed voters. With us today for our County Assessor Forum are Steve Drew and Glen Morgan. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for opening remarks, and then we will ask questions. The candidate who has asked the question will have 2 minutes, and the next candidate will have 1 minute to respond. And with that, we will open. And so, Mr. Drew, you have 2 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you. Well, I am Steve Drew. I'm the Democratic candidate for Thurston County Assessor. Let's see, a little bit about myself. I've been licensed in this state since 1983 as an independent property claims adjuster. I've owned and operated my own business for 18 years. I've served as a board member and/or an officer of 6 different nonprofit organizations. And I serve on the Governor's Recreation and Conservation Board, where I have twice been appointed and confirmed by the Senate. I'm running for this office because I believe I have the leadership skills that are needed to bring positive change there in the assessor's office. I will bring adaptive management and creative problem-solving skills to assure that taxpayers receive the best service even in these tough economic times. Under my leadership, you can expect a return focus on providing the highest level of customer service, direct accountability, and greater efficiency. I will work collaboratively with other county officials and staff to reduce the backlog in appeals. The primary focus here is to improve customer service there at the assessor's office, to make sure that each and every interaction respects the taxpayer. The taxpayer is our customer. So to do that, we will reopen the office during the lunch hour. We will seasonally open the office in the evening so that customer service counter is available to working families when they have questions about their assessed value. We will get at the backlog in appeals. We will update the website so that people have an easy and understandable way to pull up comparable sales and verify their assessed value from their desktop at home, or they can come into the office at these new hours to achieve that. The backlog in appeals is a serious problem, and it requires a real creative management style. In tough times, we're not going to be able to add staff to get at that issue. We're going to get at that issue through improving accuracy in the appeals process. That means every year updating the appeals process to get at inaccuracies that are found. That means when you file an appeal, that the assessor is going to, under my leadership, accept the Board of Equalization's determination and make that your basis in future years until the next time that your property is physically inspected. All of these changes will greatly improve operation in the office, efficiency in the office, and it is my sincere hope that it will improve your perception and your experience when you interact with the assessor on issues of valuation. I am Stephen Drew. I'm your Democratic candidate for Thurston County Assessor, and I'd appreciate your support. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan, you have 2 minutes for opening remarks.
All right. Thank you, Allyson. My name's Glen Morgan, and I'm running for Thurston County Assessor. I'm a 5th-generation Washingtonian, and I went to Columbia University, and I came back. And for the last 17 years, I've been largely working for small companies and startup companies in Washington State. For me, my background, I believe, is particularly beneficial for this office. The assessor's office is roughly a $3.2 million budget. And with my experience in business in Washington State, for me, that's going to be the 3rd largest budget and the 2nd largest team of employees that I've managed in the last 15 years. And there's a number of issues that need to be addressed at the assessor's office. First and foremost is that we need fair and accurate property values for a change, and we haven't been getting these for quite a few years now. I've oftentimes brought up the story of my father having to appeal his property taxes for 9 years in a row. And every year winning that appeal, the Board of Equalization, and each year the assessor coming back and assessing it incorrectly the following year. And that can be changed by going in there and changing the way that the assessor's office treats the Board of Equalization rulings and making those as the new benchmark for the following year. This is important, and my father isn't alone in this. I run into people who have run into these situations time after time. So that would be the first thing that I would go in there and address. If we can fix the way the assessor's office and the mass appraisal system is currently dealing with property values in Thurston County, we'll no longer have the appeals backlog, and we can work through that process. Now, in this case, there's several things that two candidates must differentiate themselves on. In my case, I think that between Stephen and I, 5 weeks ago, both of us agreed that the Great Wolf Lodge should be taxed as reported in the Olympian, just like any other business. And last week, my opponent believes that they no longer need to be taxed. And I think that that is an example of something where we do not want to have special interests coming into our county, multi-million-dollar out-of-state corporations, and getting by without paying their fair share of property taxes and shifting that tax burden to people like those folk who live across the street in manufactured homes and expecting them to pay their taxes and not letting this company pay theirs. So as your assessor, I believe that I will not give special breaks to companies like this, regardless of how much money they might try to put into campaign contributions. Thank you.
Thank you. First question to Mr. Drew. How would you improve the property tax appeal process to make it more timely and responsive? You have 2 minutes to answer the question.
Thank you. Well, our backlog in this state, in this county, is the longest in the state. And that is a pretty dubious distinction for us to have. The assessor does not fund the Board of Equalization, nor does the assessor manage the Board of Equalization. But there's an awful lot that the assessor can do to get at that backlog in appeals. First, we could, and I am committed to, working with county commissioners to extend the period for filing appeals from 30 to 60 days. That takes action from county commissioners, and I am encouraged that they will follow leadership from the assessor's office to make that change. Second is improve the website so that property owners can pull up and view their comparable sales as a measure as a means to measure their assessed value, so that they get from a point of being concerned about their assessed value to hopefully a good percentage of those people through research understanding how that assessed value was calculated. That will greatly reduce the number of appeals being filed to begin with. The second thing that will reduce that number of appeals is to annually make corrections in the model when we find inaccuracies leading to appeals, so that every year we improve the model so that areas of inaccuracy and inequity are corrected. In addition, we need to make the Board of Equalization's determination the taxpayer's basis until the next time that their property is physically inspected, and I will make that change. We also need to get information out to people in a timely basis, a complete explanation as to how their assessed value was determined, including the comps, in order to provide people with a comprehensive and understandable explanation as to how their assessed value was established. Then we need to continue dialogue from the point of when they file that appeal all the way up until the hearing date in an effort to settle with them and resolve their concern in advance of that appeal. The appeal should be the last result, or the last solution that people take. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan, you have 1 minute to respond.
Thank you. The biggest problem with the problems with the backlog in appeals is just that there's not fair and accurate property values from the beginning, and that's what I'm working for change. When you look at these incorrect assessments that have been made broadcast and largely just inflating the property values across the county, it's really reduced the credibility that that office has. I discovered this when I was doorbelling for the Rochester school levy earlier this year. And I found people more often than not felt that their property was so overassessed that they were no longer going to support the levy or any other local levies. And while that levy did pass, I believe that this is really causing a lot of problems for the assessor's office, and we need to really correct that from the modeling standpoint forward. And I'm glad to hear that some of the proposals that I had started making months ago in this campaign are being also recognized by my opponent and others as being very important to implement in this case, particularly changing the 30-day window time, which is particularly irritating to most people who live in the county. And extending that to 90 days, I think that would be a great start. It doesn't cost the county any additional money, and I think that it gives people more time so that they can determine whether or not they should appeal.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Morgan, you could start. You'll have 2 minutes. What will be your administrative priorities for your term as assessor?
As assessor, my administrative priorities largely would be to come into the office and first correct the incorrect modeling that's being used with the Sigma mass appraisal system. And by doing so, and by being more conservative in the approach as to how we assess property values, then we will naturally reduce a lot of the appeals that currently are there. And implementing benchmarking from how the Board of Equalization determines those values moving forward, I think is a very good policy change to make. Additionally, keeping the office open at noon to 1, the only hour that working families or people can actually come by and see somebody in the assessor's office, I think that's a very important part as well. And extending that deadline from 30 to 90 days. And it has to be a very big focus. Right now you're looking at about 8,600 parcels by 2,600 residents, largely the residents in Thurston County, that have been on appeal over the last 3 years. And we need to be able to process these in a fair and equitable manner. Secondly, I think that one of the big issues right now is the recent court case that the assessor's office won with the Great Wolf Lodge regarding not allowing a multi-million-dollar out-of-state corporation to come in and set up a business in our community and operate tax-free, unlike all the other companies around it. Today it may be a water park, tomorrow it could be a casino, the day after that it could be Walmart. It isn't fair that big companies can come in there and do that, and I think that this case that the assessor's office won is very significant. And that case will end up going into appeal and be moved further down the legal chain. And I believe that that's very important to continue to prosecute that case to its fullest conclusion to the benefit of the taxpayers of Thurston County. And I think that making sure that we are fair and accurate across the board so that those people who live in manufactured homes or other homes in our community are not having that tax burden shifted to them.
Mr. Drew, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, I too believe that getting at the backlog of appeals is a key issue in the assessor's office. And if we reduce that backlog, if we reduce the number of people utilizing the appeals process, we can shift that great burden from staff to field inspections and corrections in the model and other challenges that the assessor's office faces. So that is a key focus. As for Great Wolf Lodge, let me say a couple things. Great Wolf Lodge, this whole issue of the taxes, whether or not they owe the taxes, is in the courts, and it will go to the Ninth Circuit. And my opinion about whether they owe taxes is irrelevant. I will take an oath of office to uphold the laws of the state of Washington and the state constitution, and I will uphold those laws and the state constitution. This issue is in the courts and will be resolved in the courts.
Okay, thank you. Next question, Mr. Drew, you'll have 2 minutes. Many people, particularly those who live in the county's rural areas, believe their property is not fairly assessed and their property rates are too high. Do you agree or disagree with this belief, and what would you tell rural Thurston County residents?
I recognize that that belief exists, and I also recognize that some properties in our county are overvalued. As to whether more properties are overvalued in the rural area versus the urban area, that is debatable. It is vastly more important for values across the county, whether they are on $1 million houses or $100,000 houses, whether it is businesses in downtown or farmland, that all of those properties together are fairly and equitably assessed, and that is measured. It's the ratio between the actual assessed value and the actual market value. That is the important thing. So that if all the properties are in a given point in time are assessed at slightly a higher rate as relates to market value, that does not affect an individual's taxes. What affects equity is if one property's taxes are greatly inflated as relates to market value and another property's taxes are not. So that's where the energy needs to be spent. Our values, when we get our valuation card in the mail, we often measure that against the headlines in the paper and the national news. And it's important to know that that value is the value as of January 1 of the year that you receive that valuation notice. There all are problems, and they need to be addressed. And the assessor's office has to have mechanisms to respectfully and in a timely way address those concerns and make those corrections every day of the week, every month, every year. The model itself is going to hit the mark something like 90% of the time, or a little better than that. But 10% of the time is where our energy needs to be spent in order to ensure that there's fairness and equity in all sectors of the county and in all strata of value, both commercial and residential. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, probably when you really look at how the assessments have been spread across the county, I know that something originally I looked at was looking at what the ratio studies were at the assessor's office and being able to find substantial communities within the Thurston County that are over-assessed compared to both the average within that county and also compared to the state average. Now, the issue that you're looking at, rural versus urban, isn't so much the issue, but you do see things that have been changed at the assessor's office that do harm certain categories of property owners. Very specifically, manufactured homeowners have been abused by this process, and two of the highest over-assessed neighborhoods in the county are actually people who live in manufactured homes. You can also see changes made in the model in 2006 regarding critical areas ordinance overlays and refusing to recognize those, which is what the Department of Revenue requires the assessor's office to do. And having been involved in some of those cases, I know that the history of Thurston County Assessor's Office is that they haven't followed those. Now, I may believe that people pay too much in property taxes. My opponent may believe that they don't pay enough. But regardless, the assessor only has so much of an impact on that. One of the things that we have to make sure is that we don't give special tax breaks to multi-million-dollar out-of-state corporations, regardless of how much money they give to our political campaigns. I don't know how you can represent the county while you're being paid by the people who are in litigation with the county. And that isn't what I consider fair and equitable. I don't believe that that manufactured homeowner, the single woman living across the street with her 3 children, I don't think that she should be expected to pay more in taxes than that multi-million-dollar corporation across the street.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. Morgan. Would you make any changes to the current property tax assessment structure or formulas? Why or why not? You have 2 minutes.
I think that what you have to do when you look at the actual formulas as they're made up within the Sigma mass appraisal system, and you actually look at how that database is set up, largely the appraisers at Thurston County have largely been, their job has shifted over the last number of years into going out into the field, largely collecting data and putting that back into this mass appraisal system. If you actually look at the mass appraisal system, both in the tables and the structure in which they're set up, there are quite a few multipliers they use. Some of those are standardized multipliers based on depreciation schedules and basic costs associated with the regional costs of the building materials that go into those structures. However, there are other multipliers, they call neighborhood multipliers or whatever they want to term them, that probably cannot be justified and are primarily based on the desired outcome of the ratio study for that particular neighborhood rather than what they really should be in that case. And I think that you have to look at those multipliers in those databases and make sure that that's actually providing fair and accurate property values, which I don't believe it is right now. So there are changes that can be made there. Having managed a lot of software developers and database folk and having managed technical teams like this in the past, I'm very familiar with what it takes to fix something like this. And the issue that you run into with people who set up these programs is that it's garbage in and garbage out. And right now we can clearly see that there's garbage coming out the other side with the high rate of appeals and the high rate in which these appeals are overturned at the Board of Equalization. This is something that isn't going to be necessarily easy, but it's something that can be very much achieved and can be fixed at this office.
Thank you. Mr. Drew, you have 1 minute for a response.
Well, again, the mass appraisal process in Thurston County hits the mark somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of the time. It's the 10% of the time where we need to spend our energy. The structure within the office can be greatly improved to get at the variables that kick people out of that good 90% into the bad 10%. There are not team meetings in the assessor's office presently, and in talking with staff, that was a practice that used to exist. It's an important process because when people go out to do the physical inspection, there are a number of variables that are arguably subjective. And if all of your field people are not operating with the same assumptions, for instance, as to the level of maintenance of a structure, then the information in one appraiser's area is out of equity with the information that's input into the model from another appraiser's area. And I will change that in order to prove overall equity across the county.
Thank you. Mr. Drew, next question. What is your opinion of the property tax cap relative to maintaining county services? You have 2 minutes.
Well, most of our taxes are taxes that are passed by the voters in our state, by legislative bodies elected through voters, through elections in our state. However, once at counties and cities and fire districts and school districts, there is an ability each year to effect an increase up to a cap of 1%. And that limitation of 1% provides a challenge for all of those entities to keep step with inflation, and yet I support it. And yet it is important, as the voters have spoken on this issue, that when we're raising taxes, that the voters have a say on that matter. So I do support the 1% cap.
Thank you. Mr. Morgan, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I also support the 1% cap, and I think that it's important in the assessor's office to remember that the assessor's primary duty and primary job is to make sure that there's fair and accurate property values for a change. And that is what they need to, that's what that office needs to be focused on. That is what they must do. The assessor isn't going to determine the budget for the county and how they lay it out, other than as it applies to that office itself. And I think that it's important that they stay focused, that office be kept right on task with making sure that the property values are fair and accurate for a change. And that is the single most important thing that office must do. And it requires coordination with a lot of the small taxing districts, whether they be fire departments or school districts. But I think that it's very important that it stays focused on those fair and accurate values, regardless of property category and regardless of whether it's a large multi-million-dollar out-of-state corporation or a small manufactured home. Everybody needs to be paying the same fair share. Thank you.
Mr. Morgan,
yes.
If this office is impacted by budget cuts to the administrative scope of the assessor's duties, how will you manage those cuts? You have 2 minutes.
Right. Right now, the Thurston County Assessor's Office has a budget of $3.2 million. It's likely that budget is going to be cut. It was $3.7 million 2 years ago. They've gone from a head count of 38 employees 2 years ago down to about 28 right now, of whom roughly 17 of these are appraisers, people actually going out in the field doing the work. They have to appraise 120,000 different parcels around the county, of which they have to visit them technically once every 6 years. It's a lot of work to do with a very small team there at the office. And when you're looking at budget cuts, you have to get involved in making decisions, and not easy decisions, inside that office as to how to most efficiently use the resources. Obviously, clearing up the backlog of appeals will free up a good percentage of those appraisers who right now are tied up in dealing with the appeals process. And that's an important thing to focus on, so that they're freed up to be able to actually go out and do their work in the field. Now, historically, for some reason, many of our government offices, especially in these times of hard cutbacks, seem to let go of workers, the people who are actually out there working in the field, rather than the people who are managing them. And I think that that's a mistake. I think if we look at this office, historically, the current assessor in that office has been absent a good percentage of the last 8 years. And the one thing that has been proven by the deputy assessor there now is that you can run that office. You don't need 2 high-paid individuals running that office. I believe that it can probably be done with just 1. And rather than laying off those employees who are actually out there doing the work, sometimes I think you're going to have to look at some of the upper management. Thank you.
Mr. Drew, you have 1 minute to respond.
Well, the good news is that our county's financial picture for the next year is looking good. Tough cuts were made over the last few years, and very tough cuts in the assessor's office of over 10 FTEs. But in the next fiscal year, it is not envisioned that there will be cuts in the assessor's office. But your question was, I'll take it as hypothetical for the next year. If the budget were cut, absolutely, the focus needs to be on making sure that the men and women that are out every day doing the field work, the core work that gets to bringing good information into the office and then putting it into the model that gets us to fair and equitable assessments countywide, that crew of people cannot be cut further. So if the budget is cut and we have to lose FTEs, they're going to have to come from supervisory and management personnel. Or we're going to have to get at the backlog of appeals and free up the large amount of personnel commitment of time that is spent in that backlog process and redirect that energy to the field work that needs to happen each and every year in order to assure that values are fair and equitable across the county. Thank you.
Thank you. You each have 1 minute for a closing statement. Mr. Morgan, you will go first.
Thank you. So I'm Glen Morgan. I'm running for Thurston County Assessor. I'm not the insider. My wife teaches 8th grade in the Rochester School District. My opponent's wife is a senior policy advisor for our governor, Christine Gregoire. I was elected to the board of the Thurston County Farm Bureau. My opponent has been appointed by the governor to various offices and positions. My opponent his campaign is largely financed by political insiders and powerful special interests looking for special relationships in this office. My campaign is largely financed by college roommates, friends of mine, neighbors, people in the community who write me letters all day, all the time. I receive them every week, letters that come to me, and of the problems that they have with the assessor's office. I will recognize that I work for the taxpayer. I do not work for anybody else. This is who I'm going to represent when I'm in that office. My background makes me feel very comfortable with dealing both with the budget and the personnel issues that that office has and the technical requirements that are going to be required of me in that office. We don't need another appraiser. We don't need another insider. We need somebody who's going to be willing to go out there and recognize that they work for the taxpayer. And that would be me, Glen Morgan. Thank you.
Mr. Drew, 1 minute.
Well, I am Steve Drew. I'm your Democratic candidate for Thurston County Assessor. I'll respond to a couple things. You know, it is nonsense to suggest that I'm an insider. I'm a small business owner. I'm running to change what happens there at the assessor's office. This has been my theme, and this is the reason why I entered this race from the beginning. This is the only reason why I seek this office is to positively affect how the assessor's office interacts with the taxpayers. Let's see, I'll give you a rundown of some endorsements. I am honored to have the enthusiastic endorsement of the Olympian editorial board, and I encourage folks to go on the Olympian site and read that editorial. It is detailed and it has solid information about both of the candidates in this race. I'm endorsed by State Treasurer Jim McIntyre, by State Senator Karen Frazier, by Representatives Sam Hunt, Brendan Williams, and Fred Finn, by the Washington Federation of State Employees, by the Olympia Area Building Trades, by Lacey Professional Firefighters, by Thurston Lewis Mason Labor Council, by many counselors from Lacey, Olympia, Tenino, and Tumwater. And for a full list of these folks who've endorsed my candidacy and community leaders across the county, I encourage you to visit my website. And if you're interested about donations, well, bear in mind that my opponent's largest donation is $5,000 from a bankruptcy attorney in Maryland. I have no contributions of that size. None of my contributions exceed $800, except for Kathleen Drew and Stephen Drew, who have given to this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to both our candidates for joining us today. And thank you for joining the League of Women Voters. Thank you for joining the League of Women Voters. And please remember, we accept both men and women as members, and we would love to have you join us. And thank you to TCTV for sponsoring these forums. And remember, please vote. All right.